Mr. Durst is present. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, all are present. Mr. Lewin is present for the people with Mr. Bailey and Mr. Henderson, and we have Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin representing. Mr. Durst, you may continue your examination.
Mr. Durst, you know what structuring money is, correct? I'll be honest, the only time I got it right was when she told me to turn it on. I've not remembered it once on my own. Mr. Durst, do you know what structuring is?
In terms of a bank account?
Yes.
Yes, I've been advised what structuring is.
So I don't need to go through what it means, correct?
Not for me.
All right, so you would agree, Mr. Durst, that you have historically structured money when you are preparing to flee. Is that correct?
Well, I found out after I was arrested in March of 2015 that withdrawing money, the way I was doing it, by 9,000 or 9,500 amounts, was structuring. I never thought, I don't think I structured withdrawals because I was planning on fleeing. I've only fled once.
Well, Mr. Durst, you fled twice.
Twice. I didn't get very far in New Orleans, though.
So would you agree, Mr. Durst, that you were aware, your understanding, the reason you quote structured was because you thought that if you took out amounts that were less than $10,000, you would be able to avoid scrutiny. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you would agree that the times that you started structuring had to do with the timing around your the Kathy Durst reinvestigation. That was the first time, and then again when you were preparing to flee in 2015, correct?
No, I think I've been structuring for many, 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 many years without knowing that I was structuring.
Well, would you agree, Mr. Durst, that the structuring in 2000 began after you found out about the reinvestigation?
No.
When did the structuring start?
I think that I've been withdrawing amounts of money by $9,500 for probably the past 50 years.
Well, would you agree, Mr. Durst, you heard the testimony of Eric Van Dorn from the FBI, correct?
I heard it.
Were you paying much attention to it or no?
I remember the testimony.
So you would agree, Mr. Durst, that he was explaining your pattern of withdrawing money, correct?
Correct.
And he was looking at, for instance, 2000. And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that your structuring in 2000 began the week of October 23rd of 2000?
No, I'm not going to agree to this stuff. I've been taking money out of my accounts for, I think, probably the last 40 years,
So
periodically.
So is it your testimony that you believe that if we look at your bank records for 2000 before October 23rd, we should see a bunch of withdrawals of large amounts of money, 9,000, 9,500, et cetera?
I was taking money out of the bank in sums of $9,500 because if you take out $10,000 or more, they make you fill out big forms, and it takes time at the bank. And I've been doing that for many, many years before I even met Kathy.
Mr. Durst, you have agreed that you sent Susan Berman $50,000, two $25,000 amounts in the weeks right before her death, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, you sent her the second $25,000. You sent her because her car broke and it needed to get fixed, correct?
That's what she told me.
Does $25,000 seem excessive to fix a car that's broken?
I would mean to repair a car. No, $25,000 seems like you could repair a Ferrari or something.
Right, you would agree that sounds like a lot of money to repair a car, right?
Or-
So you were aware that at the time that Susan Berman was asking you for money in November of 2000, she had a very old, broken down Chrysler convertible, correct?
I remember the Chrysler convertible.
And is it fair to say, I think we might agree on something here, to call that car a beater would be generous, right?
To call that car a what?
A beater would be generous.
It was wrecked.
Okay, so we agree. It was in very poor shape. So you would agree that she didn't need $25,000 to repair that old LeBaron convertible. That LeBaron convertible was a wreck.
She decided not to repair the Chrysler convertible, and she bought some kind of SUV.
Right, she bought an Isuzu Trooper. Correct? Can you show that image, please? Yes. That's the car, correct?
I don't doubt I never saw it.
And by the way, just so we're clear, go back to the picture. Is this basically where you're saying you parked? It would be parallel to the house where the Crown Vic, the police car, is parked?
I think there was a second car on the other side of the SUV.
Right, so what I'm asking you is you didn't park in the driveway, right?
No, I parked where that black whatever it is.
Right, by the black, meaning the Crown Vic that's dark brown or burgundy next to the left of the 1527, correct?
Yes, that's about where I parked.
So you would agree that that used Isuzu Trooper is not a $25,000 car, correct?
Correct.
So, Mr. Durst, does it make sense then when she's telling you, I need money to repair my car, why would you send her $25,000?
Because I am basically a generous person.
But haven't you testified, Mr. Durst, that in fact you're not a generous person, that unlike the rest of your family, you're very cheap? Isn't that what you previously said, Mr. Durst?
Say that again.
You just said, I'm a generous person, but haven't you yourself agreed that not only are you not generous, you are in fact a cheap person, correct?
I am cheap the way I treat myself.
So you're saying you're cheap the way you treat yourself, but you're very generous with other people?
People I like, yes.
Well, when you say people you like, would you agree that you've been generous with Emily Altman, correct?
Correct.
You've been generous with Susan Giordano, correct?
Correct.
You've been generous with Jean Clark, correct?
Correct.
And you were generous with Susan Berman, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree that for different reasons, whether their information was true or not, all four of these women had the possibility to either end up testifying in court to help you as witnesses for you or to testify against you, correct? And you were aware of it. Is that right?
I can't imagine that Susie Giordano has any information about me that if it got out would hurt me. And I feel the same way about Jean Clark.
Well, let's talk about Susie Giordano, Mr. Durst. She testified that she sent you more than $100,000 in a suitcase.
She sent me my money, yes.
And Mr. Durst, it's your position that that was not incriminating evidence?
Sending somebody money in a suitcase, I don't think is a crime.
So, Mr. Durst, are you saying that you don't think that Susie Giordano's testimony in this case in any way hurt your case?
Quite the contrary, I thought her testimony helped my case.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that whether it helped or hurt, you had talked to Susie Giordano well in advance and for several years about potentially testifying as a witness for you, correct? As a character witness?
No,
You,
I would not agree, and I never talked to Susie Giordano about testifying.
did you at one point, Mr. Durst, I'm going to move on to a different area. Let's talk about Diane Boucher for a moment. What were your plans around Christmas 2000?
Christmas I was going to spend with Susan.
And what were your plans right before Christmas, what we were going to do?
Well, Diane Boucher I was with on the 20th, the 21st, and the morning of the 22nd before I drove from Humboldt County to Bakersfield.
Now, you heard Mr. DeGuerin's opening statement on May 19, 2021, correct?
I heard his opening statement.
Did he mention anything in that opening statement about any plans that you had to see Diane Boucher?
I planned to see Diane Boucher, and I saw Diane Boucher.
Listen to my question. In his opening statement, did Mr. DeGuerin mention at all anything? Did he even mention the name Diane Boucher?
You're asking me what Dick DeGuerin said in his opening?
Yes.
I don't recall.
Mr. Henderson, can you play the excerpt, please?
316, 316.
Opening statements are not evidence. Your Honor, I want to confront.
No.
Is the court? All right. Your Honor, am I allowed to ask Mr. Durst about a statement that's in the opening statement?
No, you may not. Had
All
there
right.
been an objection, I would have sustained it.
Mr. Durst, did you try to hide your trip to California?
Did I try to hide my...
Trip to Los Angeles. Did you try to hide your trip to Southern California?
No.
Mr. Durst, for years, haven't you lied and perjured yourself about whether you were in Southern California or not between December 19th and December 23rd?
But I did not try to hide it. After the fact, when I found Susan Berman's body, I denied being in Southern California.
Okay, let me ask my question then a little more specifically. For years, you have tried to hide the fact that you were in Los Angeles on, you say, December 22nd and December 23rd. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it's now your testimony that you went to California on December 19th, specifically to assist your friend Diane Boucher with her care after surgery. Is that right?
No, I went on December 19th to assist Diane with the procedure she was having on her female equipment and to take my furniture and files out of my office in Eureka.
So, Mr. Durst, was the
I haven't finished answering your question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. I apologize. Keep going.
So besides assisting Diane. I closed my office in Eureka. I picked up my Ford Explorer from the Harper's Ford dealer.
So are you saying that the purpose of the trip to Northern California was to do the personal errands that you just discussed, or was the purpose to take care of Diane Boucher, and while you were up there, you managed to do those personal things? What was the purpose for the trip to Northern California?
To do the three things I just said.
Well, Mr. Durst, you would agree that closing up your office and getting the keys to your Ford Explorer were not things that you specifically had to do, allegedly, on December 20th, correct?
I did not have to do any of it on December 20th.
Well, I assume you had to help Diane Boucher with her female surgery because that's when she was having it, correct?
She changed it 3 or 4 times. I think maybe if I told her I could not be there on the 20th, she would have delayed it.
But she planned to have surgery on the 20th because you were going to take care of her, correct?
One of the reasons, yes.
And what kind of female surgery was she having?
I don't know.
And what exactly were you going to be doing with respect to Diane Boucher?
I was going to take Diane Boucher to the hospital in the morning, and I was going to pick her up in the afternoon, and then I was going to stay with her for the next 2 days.
Well, were you the person that was going to be providing her aftercare?
She wasn't going to need any aftercare. When I picked her up at the hospital, she had a shopping bag full of, in her word, industrial strength tampons, pads, and adult diapers. And she was supposed to change everything every 2 hours until the bleeding either stopped or slowed down enormously.
But you were the person that was supposed to be there taking care of her, is that correct?
Yes.
Let me
I
ask,
don't know about taking care of her. I mean, I'm not a nurse.
well, Mr. Durst, given who you are, does that sound like the kind of thing, playing, in essence, nursemaid to a female friend undergoing female surgery, does that sound like the kind of thing that you would be doing in a million years?
That I would be doing in what? In a million years?
Yes.
Well, I don't know about a million years, but it is the kind of thing that I would do for my friends, yes.
So to you, it's not out of character for you to be taking care of a female friend undergoing female surgery and then staying at her house to take care of her. That's just a typical Bob Durst thing to do?
Absolutely.
And is there a reason, Mr. Durst, why you never mentioned anything about Diane Boucher to Andrew Jarecki, to Mark Smerling, to myself when I interviewed you with detectives in Louisiana? Is there any reason that you never mentioned this at all prior to your testimony?
I would mention it if somebody asked me what I did on the 19th, the 20th, the 21st, 22nd.
Yeah, let's put it up. Did you mention it during your testimony in Galveston?
I have no idea.
Well, if I were to ask you, Mr. Durst, do you think that you mentioned in Galveston that you went out to California to take care of your friend Diane Boucher? What do you think?
I don't really see it being relevant. I would have answered it if somebody had asked me.
Well, you're not going to tell us that this would have been an issue that you were told you couldn't discuss, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Durst, would you at least agree, would you concede that as far as you know, that you cannot point to a single instance where you ever mentioned taking care of Diane Boucher to any court, to any investigator, or during any interview, or to anybody in the media?
I cannot imagine what relevance it had to any of these things.
Well, it would explain, Mr. Durst, why you came to California other than to murder Susan Berman, correct?
Not correct. I did not murder Susan Berman.
Well, you understand that you are a suspect and have been a suspect in Susan Berman's murder, correct?
Correct.
You agree that you have now admitted that you flew into Northern California instead of Southern California, correct?
I flew to San Francisco and then I flew to Humboldt County.
And you agree, Mr. Durst, that you've now also admitted that you drove all the way down to Southern California from Northern California, correct?
In the SUV that I picked up at Harper Ford.
You now testify that's what you did, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that you have to have an explanation as to why didn't you just fly to Los Angeles in the first place? You agree you need that explanation, right?
I don't agree I need the explanation. I wanted to go to Northern California and do the three things, actually it's four things. I was running out of marijuana and I wanted to buy marijuana from my friend in Garbersville.
Well, I'm going to get there in a second, but what I'm asking you, Mr. Durst, is would you agree that you needed and you need currently to be able to explain why you had to stop in Northern California first, and that Diane Boucher is a very convenient reason? Would you agree, even if it's true, it's convenient?
It's true, and I don't understand what you mean by convenient.
What I mean by convenient, Mr. Durst, is that you're in a position where you need to explain why it is that you ended up going to Northern California only to get in a vehicle shortly thereafter and drive all the way down to Southern California. And that saying you have to take care of Diane Boucher is a convenient way of explaining, hey, here's why I had to go to Northern California first. Would you agree that what I'm saying is correct, even if the excuse is true?
Object on the argument.
Overruled.
I had to go to Northern California, and I had to go to Southern California. I could either fly to Los Angeles. No, it made total sense to do what I did because Susan and I wanted to drive up to San Francisco and stop in Big Sur on the way. I could have flown to Los Angeles, but then there'd be no way to get to Big Sur.
Well, Mr. Durst, couldn't you have rented a car? Couldn't you have flown down to Los Angeles and rented a car?
I could have flown to Los Angeles and rented a car and driven it to San Francisco, but I'd rather do it in my car.
You would agree, Mr. Durst, that that is an absolutely horrific 15 to 16 hour drive from...
It's more like 12 or 13 hours.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that in the route that you're taking down there, you're not going down Highway 1? It's an ugly drive that's not very enjoyable. Would you agree?
It's a terrible drive.
And you're a multimillionaire, and you're saying you just chose to take that drive rather than fly down and rent something. Is that correct?
Somehow, Susan and I came up with plans that I would join her for a staycation in Los Angeles for 4 days And then we would drive to San Francisco, stopping in Big Sur, and she was going to have friends of hers meet us at a restaurant called Nepenthe. And then we were going to drive to San Francisco the next day and meet with the architect, Mike Yoshida, at the townhouse that I had bought, that I had offered Susan the ground floor of.
So the question, though, that I'm asking you, Mr. Durst, is you could have done everything you just said except flown down to Los Angeles, saved yourself the horrible drive, and then done everything else you just said, correct?
What would I do with my SUV?
What would you do with your SUV? Well, Mr. Durst, you could have waited to pick it up until you got back. You could have kept it parked where it was parked. You could have parked it at an airport. Do you think all of those options would have worked?
Object to the form of question, Your Honor.
Overruled? He made it a question.
You could have done any of those three things I just said, correct?
I thought what Susan and I had planned on, well, actually Diane and Susan and I had planned on, sounded like a very pleasant way to spend 2 weeks.
Wait, Diane was going to come down with you as well?
No, but Diane made friends with Susan Berman when Susan Berman visited me in Trinidad.
But what does Diane have to do with the planning? I thought she's having female surgery.
That's what I was doing with Diane.
Mr. Durst, can you explain why during the March 15, 2015 interview that you had with me that you never mentioned anything about Diane Boucher?
I don't think I was asked anything about Diane Boucher.
Mr. Durst, you were repeatedly asked about your trip to California and your trip, as I accused you, of going to Los Angeles, correct?
Correct.
So, Mr. Durst, when I was repeatedly asking you what you were doing in Northern California, do you recall that?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall me saying to you, Mr. Durst, you don't usually take 4-day trips, Bob? And you responding, yes, that's correct. I don't usually do that. Do you recall that?
I did not intend to take a 4-day trip.
And Mr. Durst, at any point in time when I was asking you about that trip, you could have certainly said to me, hey, John, I was going there to help Diane Boucher with her female problems, correct?
I could have said that, yes.
And you told me that you were trying to get a plea bargain with me by telling me as much information as possible. So can you explain why you didn't produce that information?
I still have a lot of difficulty.
What's that?
Relevance.
You're good.
Can you explain why you did not mention that information?
I cannot, but I also did not tell you that I got the car washed.
So you're going to equate, Mr. Durst, one of the main reasons for your trip to California, meaning Diane Boucher, you're going to say that that's the same level of importance as whether you got the car washed, and that's why you didn't mention it? Is that your testimony?
Yes, my testimony is I did not go minute by minute what I did all those days.
So in your point to me is that I didn't really ask you what you were doing out there. Is that correct?
I think you probably did ask me, but you asked me about Los Angeles.
Okay. RD 370, 31515, page 87, lines 12 through 19.
Equals 290. 291.
What made you take a 4-day trip? What were you doing out there? Do you remember?
I think I was wrapping up my affairs. I had sold the house.
Right.
I still had an office.
Right.
I still had a car. And I think I went out there to take my stuff out of the office. It was rented. And to sell the car.
Mr. Durst, did you notice that of the 3 reasons you just testified to why you came out to Northern California, do you notice that 1 is missing from your explanation?
No, 2 were missing. The fact that I was going to Garbersville to meet my friend and buy a pound of marijuana, that is also missing.
Yeah, I was going to get to that, but yes, and Diane Boucher, correct?
Correct.
Can you explain why those 2 details are missing?
I have no idea.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that in fact, the reason that those 2 details are missing is because at the time you had talked to me, you hadn't made them up yet?
The answer to that is no.
When did you make them up?
I did not make them up. I did buy a
Object to
pound of
question.
marijuana,
Overruled.
and I did take Diane Boucher to the Humboldt County Hospital.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that I further pushed you about the reason for the trip, and you acknowledged that you were just not going to be able to explain it? Is that correct?
I don't know. Why don't you put it up there?
RD 371, 315-15, page 88, lines 13 through 26.
Again, maybe it's 291.
You agree it was very strange for you to be going out here. When you were asked about it, you said you were out here for a couple of weeks. But,
That's what I thought.
right, but you were only out there for 4 days.
4 days.
And you agree you didn't take 4-day trips to San Francisco back then.
Not from New York, I know.
Yeah. So as you sit here, it's fair to say you really can't explain it.
I can't explain it.
Well, it's your testimony, Mr. Durst, correct, that you could explain it. You could have said, well, I'm out there and I'm going to take care of Diane Boucher and I'm going to go buy some weed in Garberville, and that would have had nothing to do with Susan Berman in Los Angeles, correct?
Correct.
So, Mr. Durst, you've explained why it was that you had the need to lie about Susan Berman, correct? You've explained that, correct?
No. I don't have any need to lie about Susan Berman.
Mr. Durst, you've explained that you lied about having gone to Los Angeles and found Susan's body because you were concerned that if you admitted it, everyone would think you murdered her, correct?
Correct.
But can you explain why you would have had any need to lie about taking care of Diane Boucher? Why wouldn't you just mention it?
I just didn't.
Well, is it your position, Mr. Durst, that you just didn't unintentionally? Or is it your position, Mr. Durst, that when you said, after I pushed you on it, I can't explain it, that you were lying?
I can't explain the 4-day trip because I would have had to bring up that I'd found Susan Berman's body.
Well, Mr. Durst, wait a minute. You could have easily said, you would agree, here's why I'm taking this 4-day trip. I'm taking this unexpected 4-day trip because I have to take care of my friend Diane Boucher, who needs my help, and I need to take care of her for a couple of days. You wouldn't even need to have explained the weed, and I needed to do these 2 other things. You could have easily explained the 4-day trip with that explanation, couldn't you?
No. I would not have planned a 4-day trip to California just to take care of Diane Boucher.
No, Mr. Durst, you said that you had to do 2 other things. You had to clean out your office, and you had to, you said, clean up your affairs and get the weed. So my question to you is, there's no reason, correct, Mr. Durst, that you could not have simply said, right at this point in time, yeah, the main reason I'm going out here is to take care of Diane Boucher. You could have said that, correct?
The main reason I was going out was to have a staycation with Susan Berman in Los Angeles.
Mr. Durst, we're not talking about Los Angeles. We're talking about, at this point in time, you were denying that you were ever in Los Angeles, correct?
In our interview,
During this interview, we're talking about, at this point in time, why you took a 4-day trip to San Francisco, correct? Correct?
correct.
And the last clip also involved why you would take a 4-day trip to San Francisco, correct?
Say that again.
The last clip that I just played for you, before this one,
How had something to do with a 4-day trip to San Francisco?
to San Francisco, correct?
Correct,
Neither one of these questions mentioned Los Angeles at all, correct?
correct,
Neither one of these questions mentioned Susan Berman at all, correct?
correct.
So can you tell me how saying I helped Diane Boucher because she needed surgery would have in any way implicated you in anything having to do with Susan Berman?
It would not.
So the problem, Mr. Durst, wouldn't you agree, is that at the time you were coming up with this lie during the March 15, 2015 interview, you had not thought of the idea yet of Diane Boucher, correct?
Everything you just said is not correct.
So I'm just going to ask this question. Can you explain, right now, can you explain why, in response, you did not mention Diane Boucher?
I cannot explain my actions in this kind of detail. I cannot explain why I gave Susan Berman money when she was telling nasty stories about me.
Mr. Durst, you would agree that I just asked you to try to explain why you didn't bring up Diane Boucher, and you understood by that question that you did not have a reasonable explanation, correct?
There's no need for a reasonable explanation. I did what I did.
So my question, Mr. Durst, is what made you equate back and mention, even though I didn't bring it up, what made you connect up your conduct in not explaining that you saw Diane Boucher with your conduct in sending Susan Berman money when she was saying you were a murderer? What made you connect those two things in your response?
Because the questions I was answering in both those situations is the same.
It's the same, Mr. Durst, you would agree, in that anybody looking at it, you cannot explain why you would do either thing, correct?
Yeah, but there's no reason to explain it.
Well, the reason to explain it, Mr. Durst, is you're on trial for special circumstance murder, and this is a key issue. So would you agree there is a reason to explain it if you can do so? We're not talking in a bar, right?
Inform of the question.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
part of the question.
we're not in a bar is, strike that, disregard that.
Mr. Durst, you understand you're up here testifying in a special circumstance murder case, correct?
Special circumstance. I understand special and I understand circumstance. When you put it together, I don't understand it.
You're up here testifying in a special circumstance murder case in that it is alleged that you committed first-degree murder with the use of a firearm. It is further alleged that you did so while lying in wait. It is further alleged that you did so to commit a witness killing. Do you understand?
How does that connect me to Morris Black?
Mr. Durst, you just said I don't need to explain it. And my question to you is, you're testifying in a special circumstance murder trial, explaining why you did what you did and being cross-examined. Don't you agree, Mr. Durst, that you have every motivation and maybe at this point, every necessity in explaining exactly what you did and why you did it?
I don't think the jurors are going to be interested in why I took my friend Diane Boucher to Humboldt County Hospital to have an operation. I don't think they care if I bought a pound of marijuana.
Do you think they care, Mr. Durst, whether or not those two things happened?
Not interrupt the answer.
Oh, I thought he was, okay.
He's speaking slowly, so he might not have been
Okay.
finished.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Durst. Go ahead.
Which two things are we talking about now?
So,
Let me go to the next question.
you just, a moment ago, Mr. Durst, you just said that you don't think the jury cares or is interested in whether you were taking Diane Boucher to the hospital and whether or not or why you bought a pound of marijuana. And my question to you is, would you agree that the jury's concern is to determine whether, in fact, those things actually happened? Would you agree?
I think you answered your own question.
No, I
I
asked
don't
you a leading
think they-
question. I'm asking you whether you agree with the statement I gave or not. Do you agree or not? Is that what the jury's supposed to do? Are they supposed to figure out whether what you are saying about Diane Boucher and the marijuana is true?
Well, Diane Boucher died from cancer of her ovaries in 2005. So there's no way I can have her explain to anybody that I took her to the hospital and the pound of marijuana is long gone.
Well, we're going to get to that in a moment. My question to you is, Mr. Durst, you just said a moment ago, it was your response, the jury doesn't care. And then you explain why they don't care. I'm asking you, you would agree, Mr. Durst, that it is certainly relevant for the jury to determine whether or not you are telling the truth about this stuff or whether you are sitting up there making up lie after lie after lie. You would agree that's
Object to the
a
following
reasonable
question.
thing for them to
Sorry,
assess.
man.
Overruled?
Well, when they listen to your question with the lie after lie after lie after lie, and I'm not lying,
Mr. Durst, would you agree that the jury, you said it doesn't matter, they're not concerned about it, the jurors have to assess whether or not you're being truthful about Diane Boucher, is that correct?
yes,
And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that the fact that you never mentioned Diane Boucher when you were specifically asked about your reasons for the trip twice in the interview from 2015 that I just played for you, would you agree that that certainly leads to a reasonable inference that you are potentially not being truthful?
no,
Mr. Durst, you mentioned a moment ago that Diane Boucher is dead, correct?
correct.
You have in your answers to different questions, when you have been asked to provide evidence, you will say things like, I told Nick Scappetta, correct?
Not correct.
Have you not referred numerous times in this case to when I have asked you, well, isn't it true you never said this before? You will say, well, I told Nick Scappetta, correct?
If the question had to do with Kathy Durst's disappearance or Janine Pirro's investigation. I would have naturally told the investigator that had been hired by my father about whatever it was.
So, Nick Scapetta represented you in 1982, correct?
Correct.
And you realize that he's dead, correct?
I realize that he's dead.
And you realize that because he's dead, Mr. Durst,
No, I just misspoke. He did not represent me in 1982. Oh, I'm wrong again. Yes, he did represent me in 1982.
your misspeaking involved, he didn't represent you in 2000 with the reinvestigation, correct?
In 2000, I was represented by Joel Cohn, not by Nick Scapetta.
Right, so my question though, Mr. Durst, is you would agree that there have been many times you've answered a question by saying, I said that to Nick Scapetta. That is correct, correct?
Correct.
And you are aware that in saying that, Nick Scapetta's dead, correct?
Nick Scapetta's dead.
You've also mentioned Ed Wright as someone you told information to, correct?
Correct.
And you also are aware that Ed Wright is dead, correct?
I am not aware that he is dead.
Your attorneys have stipulated that he died in March of 2021.
I mean, he just died.
Just died is still dead, would you agree?
He's definitely still dead if he died in March of 2021.
So that's another person that you have pointed to that you're aware cannot be called because he's dead, correct?
But when I pointed to him, he was living.
You were also aware, Mr. Durst, that if he was living, he was in his 90s and was not on any witness list because he was your lawyer's investigator, correct?
I don't know why you did not put him on your witness list.
You're well aware, Mr. Durst, we've had motions on it. You know I can't call Ed Wright because he has a privilege.
I thought that he had, I was told that because Ed Wright talked to the newspapers and talked to the lawyers representing the McCormack family suing me, that the privilege had been pierced.
So, Mr. Durst, let's move off Ed Wright for a moment. You've now mentioned Diane Boucher, correct?
I now mentioned,
Yes, you never mentioned her in 2015. You never mentioned her in 2010 or in 2012. You're mentioning her today in 2021, correct?
correct.
And you acknowledged on your own, who brought up the fact that Diane Boucher was dead, you or me?
Well, I brought it up in answer to a question.
And the answer to the question,
You asked me
go ahead.
how I'm going to explain to the jurors about Diane Boucher and the marijuana. And I brought up that Diane Boucher died in 2005 from ovary cancer,
And you brought,
ovarian cancer. So there'd be no way for me to convince the jurors that what Diane Boucher did with me happened.
right, so you brought up in advance on your own. You said, hey, listen, I have this version about Diane Boucher, but I'll admit she died 13 or 14 years ago, so I can't prove that it happened. That's what you said, correct?
Correct.
Testimony.
And you also aware, Mr. Durst, that not only can't you prove the testimony because she's dead, but you know I can't disprove it, correct?
Yeah, I can't prove it and you can't disprove it, correct.
And it's your position that it's not an accident or something intentional, that you are using the equivalent of an alibi, Diane Boucher, of somebody who's dead and I can't call to impeach it. Is that correct?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. It's your position that it's unintentional. You are not using Diane Boucher because you know that I can't call her as a witness. Is that correct?
I'm answering your questions about why I flew to Northern California.
Mr. Durst, you learned your lesson, correct, with Mike Struck when you gave an alibi that involved Bill Mayer, correct?
I learned my lesson.
Well, you told Detective Struck, hey, I was having drinks with Bill Mayer. And what happened?
What happened? I don't know what happened.
Well, you don't know what happened with Bill Mayer?
No, I know I told Mike Stroke that I had drinks with Bill Mayer because Mike Stroke wanted me to say something
Right.
about what I did after dropping Kathy at the train station.
Right, and you're aware Mike Struck went and talked to Bill Mayer, and what happened?
Say that again.
Mike Struck went and talked to Bill Mayer, correct?
Correct.
What happened when Mike Struck talked to Bill Mayer?
Bill Mayer said he did not have drinks with me.
Bill Mayer said you were lying, that you made it up, correct?
Correct.
So you agree, Mr. Durst, that you have now learned that, in fact, if you're going to come up with alibis, that you need to use people that cannot come into court to impeach them, correct?
That's argument.
I have not learned that. If I'm going to use somebody as an alibi, I'm going to tell what happened that made them an alibi.
All right. It's now your testimony that you had plans to visit Susan Berman over Christmas of 2000 and that you were going to have a staycation with her at the Chateau Marmont, correct?
Correct.
And then you guys were going to take trips to Catalina and Disneyland, correct?
And some other places, yeah.
And when did you formulate these staycation plans with Susan?
Well, it was on and off for maybe 6 months.
Were those plans made over the phone?
Yes.
And specifically, was your plan to spend the actual Christmas day with Susan?
I think she wanted to see her cousin Denny for Christmas Day. I wasn't sure I wanted to go to Denny's house on Christmas Day.
By the way, Mr. Durst, during this version, have you ever said before that, you know what, I knew Susan was planning on spending Christmas Day with Danny? Or is that an addition you just added because you realize that there's other evidence in this case that would impeach you?
No,
You would agree that prior to your testimony on direct examination, you had never told your version of a stay vacation with Susan to any investigator, to any journalist, to Andrew Jarecki, to myself and detectives in New Orleans. You'd never told anybody, correct?
Niles Brenner knew all about it.
Who did?
Niles Brenner.
Niall Brenner knew all about this staycation.
Yes.
Are you calling him as a witness?
No.
So you've now mentioned somebody that, as far as we know, is alive, correct?
He's alive. To the best of my knowledge, he's alive.
And it's your testimony that Niall Brenner can testify that he knew all about this staycation you were supposed to have with Susan Berman at the Chateau Marmont?
Correct.
And is there a reason, Mr. Durst, why you have never mentioned that Niall Brenner was aware of this.
Nobody ever asked me.
Do you intend to bring in Niall Brenner to testify?
No.
Why would you not bring in a person who could testify according to you and could back up your whole staycation plans with Susan? Why wouldn't you do that?
It doesn't.
Shifts burden
I-
of proof.
No. But I'll sustain a 352 objection. It does not shift the burden of proof, but I'm going to sustain
352, Your Honor?
Yeah, whether the lawyer is going to call a witness. Yeah.
Mr. Durst, have you ever mentioned to anybody before this moment, other than your attorneys, that Niall Brenner can support your alibi?
Well, I'm not sure which alibi we're talking about now. Niles Brenner is the one who canceled our first staycation because Niles Brenner had set up an appointment with a showrunner. I had never heard the phrase showrunner before. As a result, Susie and I had canceled our staycation and put it off until when we were going to do it in December. And Susan sent me her keys back in October, and Niall Brenner knew all about it.
So, Mr. Durst, it's your testimony that Niall Brenner knew all about this staycation that you were going to be having in December over the Christmas time with Susan at the Chateau Marmont, correct?
Well, I don't think Susan decided on the Chateau Marmont until like a week before we were supposed to go there.
Mr. Durst, a moment ago, you blurted out, correct, that Niall Brenner knew all about your staycation plans that week, correct?
You brought up all about it. Niles Brenner knew that we were going to have a staycation from December 22nd through December 26th. And on the 27th, we were going to drive to Big Sur.
You are aware that Niall Brenner was interviewed in this case, correct, Mr. Durst?
Niall Brenner is what?
Interviewed in this case, correct? You have discovery, you and your lawyers, of Niall Brenner's statements, correct?
I thought at the beginning he was a suspect.
Motion to strike is non-responsive.
Stricken, we are at the end of our day today. So we'll return tomorrow at 8:30. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. Inquisitive looks over there. What's that? Did I say 8:30? Oh, that's for me. 9:30. 9 for you. 9. You'll be here at 9. Did I say 8:30? Okay. Jury's paying attention. We have a couple points. One is I want you to look at the verdict forms. I've drafted them. So I want you to examine the proposed verdict forms. Secondly, we have a note from a juror in the corner who's not able to see the witness's face well enough for she would like to see his facial expressions better. And I'm not sure what we can do about that, if it's just her, or we can do some inquiry, if we can change the seating a little bit, or put in a booster. Number one. Number one. She's farthest away.
Let's try to see.
Pardon?
I don't think she's, I'm not.
Oh, she's not the only one. Others have some concern, but we'll see.
It can't be me, because I'm not in the line of vision. So it must be the other jurors.
Right.
Okay, we'll try to work it out to improve the sight lines. It may have to do with the alternates, with the seating of the alternates. 1, 2. I'm still exploring our schedule. So we have a holiday on the 17th, and it was, I'm sorry, not the 7th. misspeaking. Hold on. We have a holiday on September the 16th. Does that holiday extend into the 17th?
It begins, Your Honor.
September 16 is,
September, it's all day on the 16th, which means it begins sundown on the 15th, Your Honor, and ends at sundown on the 16th. Some people celebrate on the 17th as well, but we're dark that day anyway.
ordinarily we are dark. Mr. Balian raised the scintillating idea of the word I perked my ears up, deliberation. What if we're in deliberation?
Well, Mr. Durst would be unavailable on the 16th, Your Honor.
On the 16th, but what about the 17th?
I've talked to Mr. Durst about his religious issues. I have not talked to him about whether he celebrates Yom Kippur for 2 days as some observant Jews do, Your Honor. So I will report to you in the morning.
Thank you. Let's just keep an open mind about the 17th. Of course, I won't interfere with anyone's religious celebration. Yes.
Your Honor,
Mr.
an
Lewin?
issue that's important. When the court said 352, Mr. Durst has now, for the first time, stated that there is a witness who is living who can support his version of events. The defense has discovery of this witness in their statements. The court has actually litigated issues involving this witness.
I remember the witness.
Yeah.
I remember the statements.
Such statement and discovery does not exist to support what Mr. Durst is saying. I'm just concerned, Your Honor, when the court said 352,
Here's the only issue.
Okay.
You're free to explore it. I
Okay.
think, but the one limited caveat there is I'm not ready to extend that to you impeaching him with his lawyer's opening statement. The lawyer may have had reasons, believe it or not to put everything in his opening statement, and so there may be reasons that make it more not confusing or misleading. So that it is only that question which concerned me. The issue is right.
okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor,
Yes.
Is it right that he's allowed to ask why his lawyer is not calling somebody? That's the part that's...
Well, I didn't have an objection to that.
Okay.
I did not hear an objection to that, why his lawyer was not calling someone, but the issue, it is certainly something that people can argue. In other words, you have a burden of going forward on your assertions. You at least have a burden to present evidence that might raise or ask questions that might. You have a burden if you're making an assertion to support that assertion. There's not more than presenting evidence, but without evidence, it's right to question whether there is any evidence at all.
Your Honor,
Right? Yes.
we would be available for deliberation on the 17th, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, Department 81. No, question. I'm writing one. Okay.
Indicated 316, 368, it was not shown, but is it marked?
Not marked.
Pardon?
Not marked.
Not marked? Okay, and the next one will be 315 and 315A. Wait,
316.
316. We have 315, that's 316. Okay. We're getting complicated. Is there any reason I should not ring the bell?
There's lots of reasons why you should.
All right, Department 1 is adjourned.
Can you give me the